Hello everyone, Kathy Farrell here, National Educator for RNK Distributing, bringing you the December 2016 Project of the Month. And this month we will be creating this fun faux knit scarf. In preparation for this month's lesson, be sure that you visit the myfloriani.club and download your December 2016 free designs that contains your project materials for this month. In this month's materials, you will be receiving a free design from the wonderful Watercolor Florals Embroidery Design Collection. This collection has 12 designs in 2 different sizes for a total of 24 designs, and we will be working with this beautiful rose design in the project. You will also download your project construction handout. Make sure that you print this handout so that you have all of the detailed instructions you need to complete this month's project. The objectives for this month: in your software, you're going to be using the Color Play tool. You're going to recolor the floral design that you receive. You will also create a motif stitch. You will apply your new motif stitch to a fill design, and then we're going to actually update the start and stop areas in a design using the stitch tool. The materials you need: of course, your Floriani Total Control U software. You will need your free project of the month design. You will need your project handout with a detailed supply list that you'll see here. Now, this is not a project, this is not an intensive project as far as materials go. What you're going to need in the Floriani side is you're going to need Wet and Gone Tacky Stabilizer. You're going to need also Wet and Gone Stabilizer. You will need your embroidery threads. I recommend a neutral palette, but that's if you're doing a neutral colored scarf. You will need the Heat Craft tool, and this will simplify cutting the applique shapes for the project. You will need the Quilter Select glue stick to hold the applique in place, your Floriani chrome embroidery needles, and embroidery perfection tape. Most of these materials you probably have on hand. Other items that you will need: well, you need 1 skein of bulky yarn in a neutral color. And I found that you will receive better results if you use a bulkier yarn. You will also need 1/4 yard of sheer nylon organza or polyester organza. I don't recommend polyester organza when using the Heat Craft tool. When you do, it may result in discoloration, although you can use polyester organza and successfully cut out the embroidery design with scissors. It's up to you. Let's go ahead and get started in our software lesson.
I have my software open. I've got a new design. I'm going to go ahead and click on the Library tab. In the Library tab, I'm going to navigate to Free FTCU Projects. I'm going to navigate to December and highlight the December of 2016 folder. Once I have that highlighted on the Library panel, now I'm going to navigate over to my Designs panel. There I'm going to be able to see my design, and I'm going to bring in this Rose to Design. Let's go ahead and click on 3D. This is an absolutely beautifully digitized design. What we're going to do now is we're going to utilize our Color Play tool. So I'm going to click on Color Play in the window that opens up, and we can go ahead here and click on or off 3D. And if you decide to make a scarf out of a different color yarn, and my scarf was made out of a creamy off-white yarn color. But let's say I'm going to make a scarf out of a teal or a rose colored yarn. Come in under the Color Play and come in under the Color Play in the family of the yarn color that you selected. So let's say, for instance, I'm going to make a purple scarf. I might start with a base color. I could use this slider right here to darken or lighten that hue of that, and I could use that as a starting place for recoloring this embroidery design. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to utilize the Lighten tool. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on it 4 to 5 times. So watch what happens to the effective colors. And I love the color play tool. When you use it, it maintains the beautiful shading, so you will really get a nice result when you use this. So let's go ahead. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 in there. So now my colors are lamplight gray, lamplight, and a medium gray. Oh, let me step back just a little. Lamplight, sterling gray, buff, and light brown. I like that. Let's do a quick 3D in here. Looks great. Now I'm going to go ahead and say OK. That's all we're going to do with this design. I want you to do a file. I want you to do a save as with this design. You, of course, might want to save it as a WAF file first. I'm going to navigate to my flash drive if I've got one, and then I would go ahead and convert it to the machine format that I need to embroider this design out. That's all we're going to do with the embroidery design this month. Once you've accomplished that, then you can go ahead and close that design, and let's go ahead and open up a new page. In our new page, we're going to work with the grid settings first. So go ahead and right click anywhere on the vertical or the horizontal ruler, or vertical, horizontal, to bring up settings. Go down to your grid settings and select that. Underneath the spacing, what I would like you to do is set the horizontal in inches. Make sure that you're in inches right here. Okay. If you're not, close that dialog. Right click here and you can toggle back and forth between metric or imperial, which is inches. So make sure that that is selected. Then select your grid settings. Come in and under horizontal, make that 0.025. Under vertical, 0.025. And all you need to do to update that is highlight that and then go in with your keyboard and type in the numbers that you need. And then we'll leave grid major at 4 vertically and 4 horizontally. And then we're going to go ahead and say OK. We're not going to make any other changes to that. We're going to right click and we're going to do a show grid. Now once you have your grid set at 1/4 inch and 1 inch, I want you to zoom in. And I'm just going to use my scroll wheel on my mouse to zoom in so that I have a real nice area right here to see on my grid. Now I'm going to come up here to my artwork tool. I'm going to click on the rectangle. I'm going to drop down. I'm going to hold down my control key and I'm going to create a 1/4 inch rectangle. I don't want you to worry too much about the size because we're actually going to update the size right now. With that rectangle selected, let's go ahead to the transform box. Let's put this in millimeters and we're going to update the size of that rectangle. And I want you to make the width 5 millimeters and I want the height 5 millimeters. So I've got my maintain aspect ratio deselected and I'm in millimeters. And so once I've got that at perfectly 5 millimeters, I'm going to go ahead and click on apply. Now, the reason why we're putting that at 5 millimeters actually has to do with when we get ready to convert this to stitches. And all I'm going to do now to convert this to stitches is come down to my Stitch Effects toolbar down here in the very lower left-hand corner, and I'm going to click on that. So I just turned that into stitches. The default stitch length is 2.5 millimeters. We made this a 5 millimeter box, and so what's going to happen is it makes a real clean stitch file. So it's going to be 1-2 stitches right here on each side. So that was just why we went in there and actually made a change to it. What are we going to do next with this? Well, now that we've got this as showing as stitches, and I'm going to turn on the stitches so that you can see them. So let's select that and click on show stitches here so you can see the stitches in there. We're going to do something else. We're going to have that selected, and I want you to come over to the commands tab, and under the commands, under tie in and tie off, choose none for both of those and click on apply. Okay, do you see what happened there? I'm going to undo real quickly. I'm going to zoom in a little more. And what you're going to see while I've got these selected, this is my reasoning for it. When you have a tie in and a tie off, that machine command, it's going to tie in and tie off on every stitch. And we're going to use this for a fill stitch, so we don't want that to happen. So make sure that you have that selected, and then we can eliminate those by coming over here to that tie in and tie off and selecting apply. Okay, so see, now they're gone. So if you watch and observe how this stitches out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we've got a real nice clean file. We're going to turn this into a motif fill now. Make sure that you have that selected. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. And when it is selected, you're going to have this tool right here appear. And this is what's called your stitch tool. And so this is a straight stitch, and this is a lasso tool. Click the lasso tool, and then you're going to come over and click and drag and lasso that entire shape. Go all the way around the outside of it. And what happens is that it's going to select each of those vector points. You've got to use that. And now notice over here, the commands show over here. So it's got 8 stitches where the ending is, and this is the starting. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's the information that you see over here. How are we going to turn that into a motif fill? You're going to click on the Tools menu. You're going to come down under Motif Pattern Editor and do a Save Motif Pattern. If this Save Motif Pattern is grayed out, and I'm going to demonstrate that for you, I'm going to deselect this, okay, and I'm just going to select it using my regular tool. Okay, it is selected, and when I come under that Tools menu down to Pattern Motif Editor, do you see how that's grayed out? That's because I have it selected, but I've got to use this tool right here. I've got to use the Stitch Edit tool in order to select that. And by the way, you can take any motif stitch in your library and you can edit it in this same fashion. So not only can you make your own motif stitches, but you can edit existing motif stitches. And if you edit your existing motif stitches, remember, always, always, always save it as a different name. Now that I have that selected, I'm going to come back to my Tools menu. I'm going to go down to Motif Editor. And so do you see now how I have that option? So I'm going to select Motif, and this is what my pattern is. This is the grid pattern that we're creating. So you get to have a preview of the pattern that you make. We're going to click on Save, and we're going to name this square, S-Q-U-A-R-E. Okay? Now I've already created it, so I'll select that, but we're going to click on Save. And so I've already saved it. Do you want to save over the existing? So I'll go ahead and say yes. But you're going to make sure that you save your stitch pattern. Okay? Now, we're done with that. Moving to step 3 in your handout, it's time to create our shape and apply that motif fill that we just made. So we're going to come up to our artwork tool. We're going to come down, and we're just going to create a block. And there's my block. This is currently artwork. I'm going to transform that. I want the size of my artwork to be, let me go back to inches now, and let's make it 5 inches by 5 inches just to start with. All right. We're going to come down under our Stitch Effects toolbar, and we're going to load this. We're going to fill this with the motif fill. So click on the motif fill. It'll go ahead and it loads it with the default motif. We come over to our properties dialog. We click on the drop down, and we're going to scroll down under this until we find our pattern that we created. Now here's a visual cue to help you out. Anything that's in purple, that's designated with purple, means that that is a motif fill that the user created. So I've created my own motif fill patterns. For instance, I've cross and circles. I'm going to scroll all the way down. The way that these are organized is they're organized by numbers and they're organized alphabetically. So this is the F motifs, and if I keep going, because remember I named this square, so I'm going to keep going down, and I could actually even press the key on my keyboard, and this is the pattern that I created. They're alphabetical, so you're going to find square at the very end. And the reason why I mentioned that about them being organized by number and then alphabetically is that you can control where your design shows up by how you name it. So here's my square pattern, and I'm going to select it and click on apply. All right, so now I've got my squares in there. Let me go ahead and turn off my grid now because I'm pretty much done with that. And let's zoom in there. And let's kind of look at this. And what we want to do is we're going to resize the pattern and we're going to resize the grid. So how are you going to determine this? Well, the first thing you need to do is determine, number one, how wide is your scarf? I designed this project to fit in the smaller hoops of the machine. I know I get in the habit of doing projects for large hoop machines, and I said I apologize for that. So this project is actually made to fit in a hoop that is, I believe the hoop that I used was 200 millimeters by 150 millimeters. And if you look at millimeters under this transform tab, if I click on millimeters right here, my width is 127 millimeters. So if my hoop is 150 millimeters wide, I know that this design is going to fit into that hoop. So I will just tell you that you're going to have to do some math to make this fit properly, so just think about that. But that's kind of the mental approach that I took when I started creating, well, how wide is my scarf going to be and what size hoop am I going to use? Because I did want to make this a project that could be done on some of the smaller machines. Now, I hope I don't confuse you on this next part. I'm going to select this, and on my transform tab I'm looking at the size, and it's in millimeters. So I started off making this about 5.5 inches. I wanted to make sure that it would fit in the hoop. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to update the width, and I chose 120 millimeters. I'm going to come back here to the fill size, and I'm going to make my pattern size 6 millimeters. The 120 millimeters for the width is divisible by 6 millimeters. So this is even through here. It's going to fill it evenly and perfectly. I'm also going to update the stitch length, and I'm going to stay in multiples that are 120 is divisible by. So the stitch length is going to be 3 millimeters, and click on apply. Let's observe how this is going to stitch out. So I'm using my slow redraw, and I'm just dragging that around. I don't like that. I don't like the fact that it's starting up here on the top, coming all the way around the perimeter down to the bottom, and then starting that fill. How are we going to fix that? Because we can. Let's select that, and now we're going to use our edit tool. I'm going to select that, and do you see that once I clicked that, now I can see, and this right here, this is what's called a bead, and this is the stopping point, and this is the starting point. Let's see what happens when we move those. Wouldn't it be logical for this design to start up here in the upper right hand corner and finish all the way down here in the lower left hand corner? Let's see how that impacts how the design stitches out. Let's go back and observe that slow redraw. Well, would you look at that? It starts up there on the upper right hand corner, goes along the top, stitches down. That's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm now ready to save my design. So I know that my design is going to fit nicely in my smaller hoop of my machine based on the size here. I've got a real nice smooth linear stitch pattern in there. So I'm going to make sure that I save this. So let's do a file save and call that a fill. Make sure you save it as a WAF file first. So make this fill.waf, save that onto your stick. And then the last thing you want to do is do your file save as and convert it to your machine format. So choose the format that you need for your machine and give it a name. We'll call this fill, and you're ready to take that to your machine. That's it for the software lesson for this month. So what have we used? Let's just do a quick recap. Number one, we brought in the embroidery design and we used the color tool right here to recolor it, the color play. Number two, we created a pattern right here that we used to make a motif stitch. Number three, once we had our motif stitch, we brought it in, we created a box, we filled it, we've adjusted not only the commands in here, but we've also adjusted the size, and we've adjusted using the edit tool here, the start and stop point of that design, so that we have a nice smooth linear flow to that. I think that's pretty good for this particular software lesson. Let's finish up our project now.
Be sure that you print your handout for the software lesson and the project construction. And just as a quick review, I always like to include this in every project of the month. You're going to navigate on your computer to your C drive. You're going to locate the Floriani folder, open it up. In the Floriani folder, you have the designs, you have the free FTCU projects. Look for December and open up the December 2016 folder. When you do, you will see the handout, the PDF file for this month's project. Open it up and send that to your printer. Construction of this month's project is actually fairly simple. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to stitch the flowers. These are for applique. So hoop a piece of Floriani Wet and Gone tacky, and the size of the hoop that you use is based, you can actually do this on the smallest hoop of your machine. So hoop the Floriani Wet and Gone, remove the paper, score the paper to remove it, and then place your sheer fabric on top of the hoop. I did not hoop the fabric, I just laid the fabric on top of the Wet and Gone tacky. The sheer fabric that I used nylon organza. Embroider the flower design using the thread colors of your choice. You can do two. I did 2 flowers, one for each side of the scarf. You can do more, or you can do fewer, or you can do something different. It's entirely up to you. Remember, this is your project. Once you have your embroidery design done, you're going to cut it out using the Floriani Heat Craft tool. So heat up the tool, and then you just run the tool around the edge of that design. And this is on the sheer nylon organza. Leave a little bit of a lip on there because you're going to stitch this down onto the flower. This is actually just an applique. So cut out your applique designs, set them aside. The next thing that we're going to do is, I call this a yarn sandwich. I don't know what else to call it. But what you want to do is you're going to take a piece of Floriani Wet and Gone tacky and you're going to cut it to the desired scarf length. Now the length that I used was 60 inches. And I'm fairly tall. I'm 5 feet 8 inches. I don't like my scarves to be short. I want my scarves to be nice and long and hang down, or if I need to tie them in a knot because it's really cold, I want to do that. I live in Colorado. A scarf is a necessity in the winter. So it's not just something for aesthetic purposes. It actually serves a purpose. But I want my scarf to be long. So I made my scarf 60 inches in length, plus the fringe. And then I cut the Wet and Gone tacky 6 inches wide. Now my scarf's not going to be 6 inches wide, so this is a little bit wider. And the Wet and Gone that I used was a 12-inch roll of Wet and Gone. So you don't even have to use your wide roll. As a matter of fact, I don't recommend doing that. I recommend using actually the narrowest roll that you can get, which I think is 12 inches by 10 yards. So cut your Wet and Gone and then tape it down. You need a nice long surface. And I'm very fortunate in that I've got a cutting table in my craft room, but you could use an island in your kitchen or a kitchen counter, or just put it on the floor. Sweep the floor and then put it down on the floor. But you're going to pull the paper backing off, and then you've got to tape the Wet and Gone down. And I used a little piece of embroidery perfection tape to tape down that, and it'll hold it in place. So you remove the paper backing and you've got exposed the adhesive side. The adhesive side is up. Now you're going to take your yarn, and when you look at the yarn, I said a bulky yarn, and if you look at the strands of this yarn is actually multiple strands. Each strand consists of multiple strands. It's almost like it's braided. And as I said, what I found, and I've made several of these scarves, bulky yarn works best. And when you go into the craft store or go down to your shop to buy your yarn, look for something nice and bulky, and also make sure that it's really soft if you want a soft drapey scarf. Start on one edge of the Wet and Gone and start laying down the strips of yarn, okay? You don't need to get right up to the edge. As a matter of fact, if you look on the bottom picture where I've got my pointer, I left about a ½ inch gap on both sides. But you're going to lay your yarn down straight along there, and then when you go to the second piece, butt it up against the first piece. And I also left, hanging off the end here, enough for the fringe. So I left like 3 inches. So my piece of Wet and Gone was 60 inches in length. So if you want to know the measurement of the yarn, 66 inches. So I had a 3-inch overlay on each end, and that was for the purpose of having a fringe. Add the yarn until the Wet and Gone is covered. Then cover it with a second piece of Wet and Gone. You could use Wet and Gone tacky, but remember, that's our most expensive stabilizer. If you've got regular Wet and Gone, use that to cover this up. And because you left this little gap right here, this ½ inch gap, you lay that second piece of Wet and Gone on top, and then you press it here on the folds, and it will hold together. Press the edges together, that adhesive will hold it, and now you've got this yarn sandwich. So you've got a piece of Wet and Gone tacky on the bottom, then you've got your yarn in the middle, and you've got another piece of Wet and Gone on the top to hold it together. Now you're going to knit it. Okay, we're not really going to knit it. We're going to stitch this on the machine. So for the first hooping, I took my 60-inch piece of yarn sandwich and I folded it in half, and I marked the center of the scarf with a pin. I decided that instead of starting the embroidery fill stitch on one of the ends, it would make more sense to start in the center and then work my way to each end. It just made more sense to me. So I marked that, I hooped it, and I embroidered the center area. So this is the first hooping right here. I embroidered that. Take it out of the hoop, and now I'm ready for the second hooping. So when I rehoop it, I moved it up, or you can move it up or move it down, but move it in the hoop, I moved this down so that this was my second area. I went ahead and hooped it. Now, this is the edge of my hoop right here. This is actually on my machine. Do you notice that I've got a gap there? Don't worry about that. This is if you've got it firmly hooped on the top and the bottom, and you've got this lined up, that gap right there is going to be fine. If you're stressed about that, you could cut your piece of Wet and Gone a little bit wider than the hoop. And then when you hoop it, it's going to be caught all the way around. I've done this twice using this technique, and what I discovered was, guess what? You don't need to have stabilizer over here, especially with this pattern. So I'm ready to do the second one. All I'm going to do is, before I start stitching, I'm going to make sure that the last spot right here, that I line my needle up there. And ladies and gentlemen, when you're doing this project, you don't have to be exact, but this is actually a really good way to try continuous hooping. But you don't have to be exact. But what you're going to do is just make sure that it's lined up close enough there. And then stitch the second one and the third one and the fourth one and so on and so forth until you have finished this grid pattern on the whole piece of yarn sandwich. Then Once you've got it done, so you'll see right here in the picture, and I think I didn't count how many hoopings I did. This was a 5x5 grid and my scarf was 60 inches long. So I probably did 10 or 11 hoopings. But once I got done, before I wash out the stabilizer, okay, remember, this is a piece of nylon organza, but the stabilizer that we used was Wet and Gone Tacky. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to applique this directly on top of my fabric. I laid out where I wanted the flower to be, the applique. I took my Quilter Select glue stick, and notice that the glue goes on yellow. I love these. They are an absolute must-have in your room. So you put the glue down. When you put it on, it is yellow. When it dries, it turns clear. And also, it washes out. So this is a perfect solution for holding things in place. But I then laid the rose down here on top. I took it over to my machine and I just stitched around the outside here using the same thread color. And as a matter of fact, I just dropped the feed dogs and I just went around the edge here, almost like free motion quilting. So I went around the perimeter and down the side here. Voila, done. So stitch your applique into place. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the big reveal. We're going to rinse the scarf. So after you've added the applique, you're going to remove all of the Wet and Gone stabilizers. So you've got Wet and Gone Tacky and Wet and Gone. I use tepid water, not cold water, not hot water, but just tepid, just like a room temperature water. And I rinsed as much of the Wet and Gone out of the scarf as I possibly could. I live in Colorado and we have extremely, extremely hard water. And so when I first started making these scarves, for some reason, my adhesive, the adhesive that's in the Wet and Gone, was not rinsing away cleanly. My water was too hard. And I learned this tip from Debbie Homer. Use bath oil beads, and it could be Vaseline or Calgon or generic or whatever. But I take a tablespoon of bath oil beads, I drop it into a gallon of water, it doesn't have to be a lot of water, and I just let that scarf soak for about an hour. And it breaks down that adhesive. It works amazingly. And then once I had soaked it, I rinsed it again, I washed the scarf and I dried it. Once you get done, if you have any little errant threads or anything like that, just trim them. And you don't need to worry about the scarf unraveling because of the way that we created those stitches and the way they lock together. So you don't have to worry about that. The last step was to trim the fringe so that everything lined up. And voila, there is my beautiful scarf. And so you can see it hangs really nicely on the outside of my coat here. Here's the fringe. I've lined up the fringe. I just gave it a little trim, you know, kind of like trimming off the beard. And now I've got this beautiful scarf that I can wear all winter long. And it has this wonderful embroidery on there. And if you wanted to, you could get really creative with this project. You could add crystals. I thought about adding some crystals down there. I love crystals. And of course, I love Swarovski crystals. But once I put them on there, I kind of decided that it was just a little too much, so I didn't add the crystals on there. But you could put buttons on here. You could add beads onto the fringe. I mean, you know, you can do anything you want. And then, of course, you can make another one. Remember, Facebook has a Floriani embroidery group. You can post your pictures up there. If you have any questions, you can share in there, ask questions. It's a wonderful group to belong to. I would love to see your results. If you're on Instagram, you can post them. Just send them to @KCFarrell or tweet them. You can just post them on Instagram under December Project or under hashtag Floriani Embroidery. And the hashtags allow us, if you are interested in Floriani Embroidery, then this will show up for you. I also like to let you know that if you have questions about the project, I try to be really thorough and complete, but I know sometimes it doesn't make sense. It makes sense in my head, but it doesn't translate. So please feel free to email me. My email is at rnkdistributing.com. You can email me directly and I will answer your question. Or last month, someone posted a question to the Kaylee forum, Ask Kaylee, and that question was forwarded along to me. But please feel free to ask questions about the project. And just as a little tidbit, I'd like to let you know in January, we're going to be creating a project incorporating reverse applique. So hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and I will see you back in January. Until then, this is Kathy Farrell. Thank you so much.